All right. Hello, I'm Rebecca, and this is Anne and Laura, and we are graduate students at Michigan State University, and our research focuses on language, translation, and technology. And we're here today to talk to you a little bit about what we think Untranslatable Words Reveal about technology, translation technology design?
Yep.
Whatever. Anyway, we believe this is important because in an increasingly multilingual world, it's critical that we rethink the assumptions that get built into translation tools, and we rethink how we position multilingual speakers in our communities.
This video is based on ongoing research that we're conducting with multilingual learners here at Michigan State. All of these students speak English as their second, third, or oftentimes fourth language. And so we're working with them to sort of highlight their meaning-making practices and how translation plays a role in their daily communication. As we do this and as we share this work with you, we'd really appreciate any feedback you may have for us, any particular theoretical frameworks that we could use to frame our study as we proceed from here, and also just any general suggestions you might have about the patterns we're finding in the work that we're doing.
Ready? Let's go.
Okay, so the topic of our paper, our talk, is the difference is in the design how untranslatable words challenge technology and pedagogy. If we were to ask you right now to draw a diagram that illustrates the act of translation, it might look something like this one. In this diagram, a word is taken from one language and paired with its corresponding word in another language. Translation becomes an act of substitution, with the goal being an accurate and appropriate one-to-one replacement of words in the first language with words in the second language. Digital translation tools operate on this translation as a replacement model. Users type in a word or phrase in one language, select the desired destination language, and click Translate. The equivalent word or selection of words in the destination language then appears on the screen, and users can take these translated words and plug them in as substitutes for the original words that they wrote.
The problem with digital translation and current digital translation tools and technologies is not only that the results returned through these algorithms are vague, but also that they're inaccurate. When we set out to conduct these interviews with students, we wanted to talk to them about words they had in their first languages that they had trouble translating into English. We did this partially to show the amazing richness of culture that gets embedded into language, and to demonstrate one small example about how language shapes and is shaped by cultural worldviews.
Okay.
But after analyzing and compiling these interviews, we realized that they also speak to the inherent political biases that get embedded in traditional digital translation tools. Tools which operate on the assumption that whatever concepts or ideas can be expressed in one language can be equally well expressed in another language. If you operate on this assumption, untranslatability becomes a system error or a user error instead of the natural outcome of two different cultural worldviews interacting with each other. We also found that these digital translation tools have no mechanisms to take into account the gestures, motions, sounds, and other non-verbal strategies multilingual speakers employ when trying to translate untranslatable words. So throughout the next part of our presentation, we're going to talk more about different patterns we saw, and we're going to show you more clips from our interviews that we think illustrate those concepts.
Stereotype number 1. English language learners, or L2 learners of any other language, just need to know more vocabulary words. One piece of feedback we have often heard regarding international students in the context of US American universities, or generally speaking L2 speakers, is that they just need to know more English. It is said that they lack the vocabulary necessary to understand what's happening in the classroom, and that their writing doesn't reflect a college-level mastery of the English language. While in some instances this may be true, statements like these presume that the same one-to-one correspondence as the digital translation tools mentioned earlier. It assumes that when L2 speakers encounter words in one language, there must be an equivalent word in their native language, and vice versa. Therefore, not being able to find the equivalent translation word gets positioned as a deficit of the L2 learner, with a statement that if they had only known more words, they should have been able to find the right alternative. The notion of untranslatability challenges this idea by highlighting words and phrases that have no equivalents in other languages. These were exactly the words our research project attempted to uncover, and by capturing the moment of translation on video, we were able to hear L2 learners think aloud as they attempted to translate these words for us. What we found is that these speakers didn't give us words for which there is an English equivalent, one that they just didn't have or that they just didn't know. Rather, the words they gave us reflected the notion that there are words in other languages which are unique to the culture and have no equivalent in other languages. These words demand the use of other meaning-making resources. For example, Kay, right before sitting down to talk with us about komorebi, which can be roughly translated as a type of sunlight that is filtered through leafy trees, he expressed a fear that he wouldn't be able to find the right words to translate komorebi into English. Our team tried to assure him that the goal of the project was to see if there were words that were by definition almost impossible to translate into English. We talked with him about how we knew we were asking him to do something hard and that the result would probably be messy. And that was okay. While this seemed to make him feel a little better about the task, he still wasn't completely confident when we started interviewing him. While this nervousness and this feeling of being uncomfortable is surely also attributed to the presence of the camera, as in my case right now, we actually encountered moments like these frequently throughout the project, and it was a challenge we hadn't really expected when we started this project. There were moments when the nervousness in the room became palpable. It wasn't until later that we reflected on this and why this fear might have existed among the students we spoke with. We realized then that we had asked these international students to do precisely the type of thing that they may have been punished for in previous educational spaces, or that they were told were errors when they used digital translation tools. It's rare when ambiguity instead of certainty is celebrated within education. And add to this the added pressure L2 learners face to demonstrate mastery of another language, and we create an environment in which students feel compelled to provide a sufficient translation and feel embarrassed or a sense of failure when such a translation cannot be provided. So we can see here how digital translation tools also act as culturalizing agents, reinforcing the idea that a failure to find a translation word is an error, either on part of the human user or the translation tool itself. So how does this influence L2 language learners? We think that when L2 learners are told that their translation practices are errors, they can begin to internalize that evaluation of themselves. And instead of recognizing that the word they're attempting to translate is maybe untranslatable, they may believe that they just need to learn more of the second language until the equivalent is found. So we think there needs to be more awareness of the fact that those translation tools were built on the myth of one-to-one correspondence, and those type of ideologies become imposed and internalized on the users of those tools. The question therefore becomes how to rethink digital translation tools and rethink how we approach and talk about translation in educational spaces to better reflect the untranslatability of languages and challenge the current one-to-one correspondence ideology of translation.
The focus of translation processes is normally on taking one word and finding the equivalent word or words in another language to convey similar ideas. But what we saw in the Untranslatable Research Project was that multilingual speakers frequently employ nonverbal techniques to convey meaning, especially when that meaning is difficult to articulate verbally. Now we're going to show you some examples of how multilingual learners drew on various semiotic resources like hand gestures and voice inflections to convey their ideas. For example, Kai brought a digital image to help him talk about what was meant by komorebi.
This sunbeam called komorebi.
Jose used hand gestures and voice inflection to help us understand the emotion of giggle.
Use it to describe your emotion whenever you see something that's super cute. It's so cute, it's that emotion that you get when you just want to carry it and squeeze it and shake it.
Georgina explained enhache by physically enacting what enhache means.
No, that's enhache.
Marianne accompanied her explanation of cocotazo with the hand motions and voice inflections that typically accompany that word when it's used in context.
If you're playing around with somebody and they piss you off, you say, "Oh, te voy a dar un cocotazo," which means I'm gonna hit you with a coconut. You're just so dumb. Like, nobody would ever do that.
All of these examples illustrate that sometimes nonverbal cues are essential when translating words. Scholars like Ofelia Garcia and Suresh Kanagaraja have highlighted the translanguaging practices of multilingual learners, those practices that take place as L2 speakers move or shuttle between languages to make meaning. However, in digital translation tools, there currently is no space for users to either import or receive nonverbal information from the system. Furthermore, the most common educational assessment techniques that require multilingual students to demonstrate competence in the educational language, like academic papers, eliminate the possibility of multilingual students employing nonverbal information to convey meaning. Currently, we're encouraging multilingual learners to engage in multimodal composition, and I think this is one area where we can really highlight the shuttling that students do between languages as they convey meaning. Digital translation tools and educational practices that focus on written word privilege one way of communicating knowledge, ways that are well suited for some languages and cultures, but not others. L2 speakers who are accustomed to using nonverbal cues to communicate knowledge, or who come from cultures where the written word is not the dominant knowledge transmittal form, are not served well by these systems and find their practices unsupported. As a question of social justice, therefore, it's critical that we rethink ways to decentralize the importance of textual data in translation tools. It's also important that we think about pedagogical practices that will afford multilingual students the ability to use more than text to convey meaning, and that we acknowledge how L2 learners are experts at translanguaging or drawing on a variety of semiotic resources to illustrate their ideas. There's a lot we could learn from these practices, both in our technology design and educational practices.
L2 speakers do not think deeply and critically about audience. As an instructor of first-year composition at Michigan State University, I'm often part of conversations where instructors recognize that L2 speakers find themselves moving between different discourse environments. In these conversations, there's often the assumption that we have an additional responsibility to these students to help them manage this navigation process. Discussions on this topic often frame L2 students as having extra challenges when it comes to rhetorical communication because their writing and speaking situations are often fairly complex. However, we believe that the Untranslatable project demonstrates that far from requiring additional help to understand audience and purpose, multilingual speakers are typically more sensitive to rhetorical considerations, precisely because of the complex navigations they make on a daily basis. For example, Anas, a native of Syria, introduces the phrase "mafi al-domri" in this clip.
Yeah, we say "mafi domari." If I say it anywhere other than Syria, no one will understand. Mafi domari means it's empty, no one is there.
After introducing that phrase, he then goes on to talk about what that concept means, translating it roughly into a way to describe a place that's so empty that the people that would normally live there to do traditional city upkeep have left. But what is fascinating to us about Anas's interview is the way he immediately contextualizes his understanding of the word with a particular language and with a particular community within that language. He articulates this concept by saying, if I say it anywhere other than Syria, no one will understand. It has meaning for us, and it will only mean something to us. So immediately after introducing the phrase, he goes on to talk about the ways that it's highly contextualized, and he sees himself as participating in a very specific and very localized discourse community. Mahalet reflects a similar understanding with her explanation of Gersha. She explains what the word means and then immediately begins articulating how the concept of Gersha is related to Ethiopian values of hospitality and the central role that food plays in their culture. So here Mahalet is actively associating word usage with a unique discourse community. And this is the type of cognitive work that is the end goal of rhetorical instruction, but here we see it being practiced by a speaker who has little to no formal rhetorical training. So rather than taking principles taught to her in a classroom and applying them to instances of practice, like deductive learning, Mahalet is developing a theory of communication based on many instances of lived experience, inductive learning. And because she's had to think carefully about audience and community, Mahalet has a broader base of experience from which to distill rhetorical principles, even if this process of distillation is subconscious. So not only does it suggest that multilingual speakers bring cognitive assets and not deficits to our classrooms, it also asks us to think about how digital translation tools can be designed to be cognizant of the context of a word use and give cues not only about what a word means, but also about how a word should be used within various communities of discourse.
As digital technologies play a larger role in our lives, and as more L2 speakers find themselves in our educational spaces, it's important that we think critically about how we understand translation practices and the assumptions that we build into digital translation tools. We should continue thinking of ways to account for the diverse strategies L2 learners employ when translating in practice, and that we incorporate these strategies into tools and conversations about language and linguistic diversity. Technologies and theories about translation have the ability to empower L2 speakers, but they also have the ability to disempower and disenfranchise them. The difference is in the design. Thank you.
Okay, now we would really love to have a conversation about this topic with you guys now. And although we can't be there physically, we're here digitally, and we want to take advantage of these awesome new technologies. And so we want to ask you, every one of you, to pull out your phone or your laptop. Really, like really pull out your phone, pull out your laptop, do it now. And then go to untranslatable.php. We'll wait a few seconds until everybody's ready.
Once you're there, you'll find a really lovely circa 1999 pop-up box for you. That has the address to our video where it's hosted digitally. If you click OK, it also takes you to the video, so 2 ways to get there. But when you go there, we ask you not just watch the video again, because it was so entertaining, but that you also leave us a comment about some thoughts you had or some suggestions for further research, kind of maybe where you've seen some of these own patterns in your work or in your own life experiences. And yeah, we actually will get back to you, so this isn't the comment death trap. But we really do want to hear from you, and we're excited about carrying on this conversation in a public-facing way that allows the interesting thoughts and ideas that you have and that we have to be more public and shared with a broader audience. So, great, thank you.
And we will actually be there right now. So, I mean, we're recording this obviously like in the past, but we will be there right now online to answer your comments as well. So. Please do comment and let us know where you agree, where you disagree, what you think about this, and how we can take this further. That would be really great. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.